What if the one who needed saving was already buried beneath your feet? It was the kind of quiet only new beginnings had. Dust still floated in the sunlight. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway. The porch creaked when you stepped just right. Monroe, Georgia. September 3rd. Grace had just turned off the moving truck engine and stepped out with a tired smile. Behind her, Ethan jumped down, hugging his backpack tight to his chest. It was their first day at the farmhouse, old, crooked, and full of promise. A wide stretch of land backed into a tree line. Faint bird calls echoed beyond the fence. Grace had grown up in cities, but now, after the divorce, this place felt like a blank page. Somewhere they could start over. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere healing could happen, even if it came slowly. Ethan didn't say much that morning. He hadn't said much in months. He walked the property like he was expecting something to go wrong. He kicked at the tall grass near the edge of the barn and stood staring at a sagging, half-rotted shed just off the fence line. The boards looked weak. The ground dipped around the base. "Don't go in there," Grace called. "I haven't had a chance to check it out yet." He shrugged. Then he paused. Grace heard it too. A sharp sound, muffled, short, like a bark, but broken. They both froze. Another bark, weaker this time. It wasn't coming from the shed, it was coming from beneath it. Grace grabbed a flashlight and jogged over, heart pounding. She knelt beside the shed, sweeping the light under the broken slats. "Ethan," she whispered, "go grab the crowbar from the porch." The ground under the corner had sunken in, just enough to reveal something strange. Wooden planks laid crudely over a shallow dip in the soil. The barking had stopped. When Ethan returned, she pried at the boards. They splintered with a crack. The earth shifted beneath. Dust and dirt filled the air. Then, movement. A trembling paw. Grace's heart thudded. They cleared more boards, digging with their hands now. Then they saw him. A dog. Black fur caked in, mud. Ribs visible. Too weak to bark again. His eyes were open, but glassy, like he didn't know whether to be afraid or to hope. They didn't speak. They just worked, lifting the frail body out and onto the grass. He didn't growl, didn't wug, didn't fight. Grace wrapped him in a towel and held him close as Ethan watched, frozen in place. It wasn't until they carried the dog inside and laid him gently on an old comforter that Ethan knelt down beside him. He didn't touch him, just sat there, staring. "Do you think someone did this?" he finally asked. Grace didn't answer, but the shed had been sealed. The planks were nailed. Someone had buried him, alive. Later that night, after a call to the nearest animal clinic and a long, quiet drive into town, Grace sat in the vet's waiting room. She didn't know why her hands were shaking. She barely knew the dog, but something about his eyes, how they didn't blink even when she touched his face, stayed with her. The vet, a kind man in his 50s named Dr. Kerr, came out after a while. His face told them more than his words. "He's lucky," he said softly. "Malnourished. Dehydrated. He has head trauma, likely blunt force, and signs of a seizure disorder. But he made it through the night." Ethan, silent again, just nodded. "Can we take him home?" Grace asked. Dr. Kerr gave a tight smile. "He needs rest. Medication, patience. But yes, he might need all of those for a long time." That's when Ethan spoke again. "His name's Shadow." Grace looked over. "Shadow?" Ethan didn't look away from the kennel. He's been in the dark for so long, but he's still here. Grace nodded, her throat tight. They brought Shadow home the next morning. He didn't walk, just lay curled up most of the day. His eyes tracked them, but his body didn't move. Unless absolutely necessary, he didn't bark again. Not once. Ethan began sleeping on the floor next to him, using his pillow and reading aloud from a book about wolves. Sometimes, Grace would find them both asleep. Ethan curled against Shadow's side, the dog barely breathing, but always with one paw touching Ethan's arm. Feeding was slow. Baths were difficult, but they kept going. Every now and then, Grace would see the faintest flicker of a tail twitch, a flinch when Ethan laughed, a breath that didn't sound so heavy. The days passed quietly. The air got colder, and then, one morning, just before sunrise, Grace came into the living room and found Ethan standing still as a statue. Shadow was up, standing, wobbling, but up. His head turned slowly toward her, and his tail wagged. Once. Grace smiled through tears she didn't even know had started falling. Ethan crouched, his hands shaking, and reached out slowly. Shadow didn't move, but he didn't pull away. His nose brushed against Ethan's palm, and, just like that, a broken boy and a buried dog had found something they both thought they'd lost. The start of trust. The start of something new. Shadow didn't heal all at once. Some days, he barely moved. Other days, he paced the corners of the living room like he was searching for something he'd lost. Grace kept a notebook by the counter where she wrote everything down. What Shadow ate. How long he slept. The seizures. When they came. How long they lasted. What triggered them. The first one happened a week after they brought him home. It was sudden. Violent. His body stiffened, legs kicking uncontrollably, eyes rolled back. Ethan had screamed. Grace had frozen. By the time it stopped, Shadow was shaking, confused, and wet from losing control of his bladder. Ethan knelt beside him anyway, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay." Again and again. After that, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't just the quiet of the countryside anymore. It was the kind that comes when you're afraid to make a sound, when you're waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Ethan stopped sleeping on the floor. He moved his mattress next to the living room instead. He said Shadow didn't like being alone. Grace knew the truth. Neither did Ethan. Money grew tight. The vet bills were stacking up. Medication wasn't cheap, and Grace's job at the library didn't start for another 2 weeks. At the corner store one day, an older man with sharp eyes asked about the dog. "You the one who moved into the Bailey place?" he said, chewing on a toothpick. Grace nodded. "Heard y'all found a mutt under the shed," he said. "Best put it down. That place is cursed anyway." Grace didn't respond. She walked out, hands shaking. But that night, she cried. She stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, looking out over the field, and cried. She didn't know if she could do this. She didn't know if she was helping Ethan or just giving him something else that would one day break. Inside, Ethan was searching online. He found a site that let you start fundraisers for pet emergencies. He didn't ask permission. He just did it. He uploaded a photo, Shadow lying with his paw on Ethan's arm, and wrote a short caption. "We found him buried, alive. He's still fighting. I want to help him stay alive." They didn't expect anything to come of it, but by morning there were 5 donations. Then 10. Then someone from town shared the post. Then the vet clinic. Within a week, they had enough to cover the next round of medication. And more than that, cards started arriving. Notes from people in town. Some with $10 bills tucked in. Some with photos of dogs they'd lost. One said, "We lost our lab 2 years ago. Shadow reminds us of her. Keep going." People Grace had never met were suddenly waving at her in the market, asking how the dog was, offering old blankets. The town that once kept its distance began to lean in, and something changed in Ethan, too. He smiled more. He started eating full meals again. On days when Shadow seemed strong enough, they walked the back of the property. Just a few minutes at first, then longer. Ethan would talk softly. Stories about school, his dad, memories from before things fell apart. Shadow didn't react much, but he stayed beside him. Always beside him. Then one afternoon, Shadow stopped walking. He stood still, ears perked, staring into the distance. Grace followed his gaze. The old shed. It hadn't been touched since the day they found him. Ethan looked down at Shadow. You remember, Shadow didn't bark, didn't move, just stared. Grace felt something rise in her chest. Not fear, not sadness. A quiet knowing. Some pain doesn't get buried. It waits. And some dogs. They don't forget. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She walked the halls quietly, checking on Ethan, then on Shadow. When she turned back toward the kitchen, she saw it. Shadow, sitting by the back door, waiting. She opened it. He stepped out slowly, looked up at the stars, then back at her. She followed. They walked, just the two of them, back toward the shed. The moon lit the grass silver. The air was crisp and still. Shadow didn't flinch, didn't slow. He walked to the edge of the shed and lay down. Grace sat beside him, and for the first time since they found him, he leaned his head against her knee. She didn't move, didn't speak, just let him be. In the silence, Grace realized something. This dog had known real darkness, but he chose to stay, to heal, to trust, and maybe, so could they. Autumn crept in quietly. The wind began carrying the scent of turning leaves. By now, Shadow had his routines. He waited by the door each morning until Ethan grabbed his hoodie. They walked the field edge, leaves crunching under their feet, the world slowly softening. Around them, Shadow still had bad days. The seizures didn't stop. They just learned how to manage them better, what to watch for, how to speak softly through them, how to hold space for his confusion without panic. And there were other changes, too. Ethan laughed now. Not forced or polite, but the kind that tumbled out of him when Shadow tripped over his own paws chasing a leaf. One afternoon, Grace came home from town to find Ethan and Shadow asleep together in the sun, backs pressed against the shed wall. A quiet, wordless peace between them. But it wasn't all stillness. At the vet's office, during a follow-up scan, the doctor spoke gently but directly. "There's brain damage," she said, "from the trauma. We expected that. But what's surprising is how well he's compensating. He shouldn't be walking this well, or responding so clearly." Grace nodded slowly, eyes flicking to Shadow, who sat patiently by the door, tail thumping twice, then still. "He's adapting," the vet added, "but this won't ever fully go away. You should be prepared. There will be a time when the seizures get stronger again." Grace exhaled, quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't ask how long. She just reached down and scratched behind Shadow's ears. "Thank you," she whispered, more to him than the vet. Later that night, Ethan sat on the porch with a blanket draped around both him and Shadow. "Do you think he remembers?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Grace didn't answer right away. "I think he remembers the pain," she finally said, "but I think he also remembers who pulled him out of it." Ethan nodded, then added, "Sometimes I remember the day Dad left more than the days when he was here." That silence again. But this time, Shadow licked Ethan's hand. Once, and Ethan smiled. Just a little. That weekend, something unexpected happened. A woman came to the door. Older. Thin. Nervous hands. She introduced herself as Carla, sister of the man who used to own the house. "He wasn't well," she said. "After his wife died, he changed. Wouldn't let anyone in. I begged him to get help." She looked down at the porch floorboards, then back up, eyes red. "I didn't know about the dog. No one did. He told me he'd given him away." Grace said nothing, just stepped aside. Carla walked in. Shadow was lying on the rug by the fireplace. He looked up slowly. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just watched. Carla knelt down, hands trembling, and reached toward him. He flinched. Then, after a moment, pressed his head into her palm. She cried, and Grace realized how many kinds of healing were needed in that room. Carla didn't stay long, but she left a photo behind, an old, faded one of a younger Shadow, tail wagging beside a garden. On the back, it read, "Buddy, always underfoot." Ethan kept it on his nightstand from then on. Days passed, then weeks. They started calling him Shadow Buddy. Sometimes, like a blend of past and present, a way to honor both lives. Grace got the job at the library. She started making friends, real ones, not just polite nods in the store aisles. One of the donors from the fundraiser, an older woman named Martha, invited them to a harvest potluck. It was the first time Grace and Ethan had been part of anything. In years, Shadow came too. At first, people kept their distance. But then, Ethan knelt beside him, whispering something, and Shadow, timid, quiet Shadow, stood, tail twitching, and walked up to a little girl holding a roll. He licked her hand. She laughed. And just like that, something opened. By evening, Shadow had wandered from lap to lap, belly rubbed, ears scratched, resting his chin on strangers like they were old friends. No one mentioned his scars, only his softness, the way he watched Ethan like a shadow that never wanted to be apart again. When the sun set over the orchard and the stars began their quiet climb into the sky, Grace looked across the bonfire glow at her son. His cheeks were rosy. His eyes sparkled in a way they hadn't in months. And next to him, Shadow, not quite healed, but alive. So completely, beautifully alive. The first snow came early that year. A soft, quiet blanket settled over the fields and the rooftop. Everything seemed to pause, like the world was holding its breath. Inside the farmhouse, it was warm. The fire crackled. Ethan sat cross-legged by the hearth, sketching something in a notebook. Shadow lay beside him, his head resting across Ethan's foot, like it had always belonged there. The seizures had slowed lately. Still present, still unpredictable, but less sharp, less consuming. Grace had learned how to prepare the room just in case. Lights dim, soft music, a towel ready for his head. But sometimes, days passed without a single episode, and when they came, Shadow bounced back faster. One night, as wind howled outside, Ethan showed Grace the drawing he'd been working on. It was Shadow, standing in the field behind the house, scars visible, but proud. Beneath it, Ethan had written in block letters, "The dog who lived." Grace blinked. Her chest ached. But in a different way, not with grief, with something closer to awe. "You should frame it," she said. But Ethan shook his head. "It's not done. He's still writing the story." Winter deepened. Christmas lights flickered across porches in town. A local reporter reached out, asking to write a piece on Shadow's recovery. Grace hesitated. She didn't want attention. But Ethan said yes. "I think people should know," he said, "that it matters when you stop and listen, even if it's just a sound under the floor." The article went viral, first in the county, then beyond. Donations rolled in. Not just money, but letters, gifts, drawings from kids. Some had lost pets. Others just wanted to say, "Thank you for not giving up." One letter came from a soldier overseas who'd seen the story online. He wrote, "Your dog reminded me of my brother, buried in silence, but still holding on. Sometimes that's all we need, to know someone's digging for us." Grace read it twice, then a third time. Some stories ripple farther than we ever expect. One day in early spring, Carla returned. She brought a collar, old, cracked, and worn, but clean. "This was his," she said softly, placing it on the table. Back when things were good, Ethan took it carefully, fingers brushing over the faded engraving. "Buddy." He looked at Shadow. Older now, eyes wiser, body stronger. "Can I?" he asked. Grace nodded. Ethan knelt, slipped the collar over Shadow's neck. It fit like it had been waiting. "He's not Buddy anymore," Ethan whispered, "but he still remembers him. Just like I remember Dad, even if he's not coming back." Carla stayed for tea. They didn't talk about her brother. Not directly, but in the quiet between stories, there was something like forgiveness. Late that summer, Shadow stopped walking one morning. No seizure, no warning, just a heaviness. Ethan carried him inside, tears already forming. They called the vet, waited in, silence. The vet arrived, checked him gently, and smiled. "He's just tired. Happens with trauma survivors sometimes. Give him rest. Love, a few days. He'll come back to you." So they did. Ethan read to him. Grace sat beside him, knitting quietly. They moved the mattress to the floor so Shadow could sleep near their feet. On the fourth day, he stood, wobbly, slow, but standing. And Ethan cried, clutching him so tight, Shadow let out a soft grunt, then licked his face, and the tail, slow, steady, wagged. They never filled in the hole behind the shed. Grass grew around it, wildflowers too, not because they forgot, but because it became a place to remember how close life had come to fading, and how strong it had been to rise again. Sometimes Ethan sat there in the evenings, not sad, just quiet. Shadow beside him, both of them scarred, both of them survivors, both of them still writing their story. Years later, a new family moved into town. They brought a nervous rescue pup, small, skittish, afraid of loud noises. The first person to approach them was Ethan. Now 16, taller, quieter. He knelt, offered a treat, spoke gently. The dog backed away, so Ethan sat, waited, and the family watched, confused, until the dog slowly crept forward, touched his hand. Grace watched from the library window, smiling. "He's like his dog," she said to the clerk beside her. "He doesn't chase trust. He waits for it to come." Shadow grew old. His muzzle grayed. His walks slowed, but his eyes stayed kind. Every year, on the day they found him, Grace and Ethan took him to the field behind the house. Let him run, even if it was just a few slow steps now. "Your day," Ethan always said. The last year, Shadow didn't run. He just stood in the grass, faced the wind, closed his eyes, and wagged his tail. When the day came, it was gentle. A morning in late fall, Shadow lay in the sun, breathing slow, steady. Ethan beside him, hand resting on his chest. Grace brought the old collar, placed it on his paw, and together they whispered, "Thank you," for every step, every struggle, every single moment he chose to stay. He left quietly, like a shadow fading at dusk, no cry, no pain, just peace. They buried him near the shed, planted a tree, no stone, just a wooden sign carved by Ethan. Sometimes the most precious things are found beneath us, waiting to be loved. And every spring, wildflowers returned, soft, persistent, like memory, like love, like a dog who never gave up. Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our paw-some friends.